So Zoe, what's the most important lesson you've learned in your career so far?
Well, Emma, I really appreciated being asked that question. And the one thing that keeps coming up, and I think it's important for all of us here, I think it's something that's a real touchstone for an association like AWITA, is that one's personal success doesn't have to be in competition with anyone else's, and someone else's success doesn't take anything away from you. And I know it's almost easier to say that, and I know I'm sitting here with the mic, but I really believe that that's true, and I think that it's especially true now in the age of social media, where you only see the shiniest, filtered, best versions of people, and it can be harder to get a sense of all of the failures and the missteps that help us get to where we are and to grow and to learn. And so that's one of the things that I constantly think about. And so I always try and champion my colleagues and my friends who are doing great things as much as possible, because it costs nothing and it takes nothing away from me.
Empathy. It's a good feeling, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah. So Zoe, this is a slightly strange question. It's a general question. It is not designed just for you. So let's broaden it out. I suppose as a curator, one is often educating. Is there a fine line between educating and patronising your audience, and how do you negotiate that?
Thank you for tempering that, Emma. When we got the question, it seemed like, Zoe, how do you stop being so patronizing? No. Honestly, I think that trying to anticipate, I think it's always really crucial to think about who you're speaking to and why. Particularly working in the public sector, which I've always done, there is a tendency, for all the right reasons, to say, this is for everybody. It's all things to all people. But I think it's okay to be specific and to say, actually, what we want to do with this exhibition is really make sure that it's relevant to young Londoners. That can be a way of making something specific, and so that you can latch on to something. And I'm sure there have been many missteps where I've been patronizing or used jargon and art speak, but I think that sense of at least questioning yourself, asking the questions and trying to anticipate is the best way to try to preempt that. I think it also helps that most of my friends, as well as my husband, aren't in the art world. So there's this constant sense of, what the real world is, the world outside of it, what are you on about? Why does this matter? And really trying to test that and to make that as clear and to be as excited about it as possible. If something's exciting to me, then that's why I want to share it, and that's what drives it. And then you can't stop me talking.
When I was working on Cruel and Tender, which was a show that you referenced earlier on, I remember coming up with my co-curator with this line, which is, you can never make it too simple. And in some ways, I think that's really important when you're talking about art, because simple doesn't have to be dumbing something down.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes we can get carried away in our own sort of curatorial
erudition.
Anyway, yeah.
So Emma, again, is always modest, but Cruel and Tender was the first photography exhibition that ever took place at Tate Modern. And so before we'd started working together as collaborators and now friends, I had like a real fangirl moment, because I'd gone to see Cruel and Tender as a punter. I got my ticket and went to see it, and so many of those images really stayed with me. And that point about simplicity and learning, I think, is so crucial. I always think of a Thelonious Monk quote where he talks about creativity, real creativity, is making the complicated simple. It's really easy to take something simple and make it complicated, but can you have something complicated and then really relay that more widely? So with that, I'd like to ask you a question, and it has to do with art history and also labels. Do you think of yourself as an art historian, someone who primarily works with living artists and is really kind of taken the pulse of so much of what's been going on in contemporary British visual culture for the last 2 decades. Would you call yourself an art historian?
I have called myself an art historian, but only to try and show off. And I feel a fraud, I think, whenever I've said that, because my first degree was in English, and I did an MPhil in art history. And so I think I've always thought of myself in a way as an autodidact, and taught myself how to work with artists and how to talk to them, really, and talk my way into a job. I suppose what's wonderful about being a curator is this combination of the deeply practical. I love that combination, that you can be doing something really mundane, ringing somebody up and blagging for something for free, or, even, at Chisenhale, literally painting the floor myself. And then the next moment, you're writing a text which is taking you into really deeply philosophical territory. And it's so wonderful working with living artists, where a work is literally being born while you're there in the studio. And, those are probably the most fulfilling moments in one's career, aren't they, when you're talking to an artist and really teasing out what this is about. I suppose it's that moment of making something, and again, the practicalness of what the artist is making, combined with then you spinning it into something else in your head, and constructing, in a sense, a meaning for it, which I suppose is the point at which it becomes, almost like philosophy. And that, for me, is just fabulous, that combination.
So from autodidact to how you kind of grow and begin to overcome any of those kind of imposter syndrome feelings that we all feel, would you say that, were there any mentors who've played their part in your kind of teaching and learning as you've grown in your career?
My first boss was a woman called Jenny Rennie at Stoke-on-Trent City Museum and Art Gallery, and she was wonderful because she just let me do whatever I liked. And that was sometimes some quite crazy things, like building a tower of ceramic plates by David Mack, and they collapsed in the gallery, and we were surrounded by broken pottery. It was an experiment. That's what happened. That was the piece. And I was just literally learning on the job. So I think that trust thing is amazing. I'd like to think I've given other people that opportunity. I don't know whether I have. I think sisterhood's also really important. I can think of the sisters like Frances Morris and Donna De Salvo when I first joined Tate, and I was feeling rather lost because I had absolutely no idea how to survive in such a big organisation, having only worked in small ones, and they really helped.
Amazing.
I'm giving you one minute.
Right.
Yes. Last question.
Really? Okay. Let's go to Zoe's one.
Okay.
So, Zoe, quickly. Tell us, what do you think the differences are between the way art is presented in the US and in the UK?
Wow.
in
That's quick. I've always worked in UK institutions. That's been my job. I was 10 years a curator at the V&A. I've been at Tate now for just over 4, between Tate Britain and now at Tate Modern. And one of the things that really mattered, Siri wants to chime in. One of the things that I think really mattered and that I really am deeply committed to within the UK arts ecology had been, certainly when I started, a public investment and a kind of civic commitment to the arts as something that is meant to be for everyone, despite what I said before about wanting to be specific about who you speak to. That at least as a mode of address and as a way of marshalling funds, that it's something that could belong to everyone. And the few projects that I have done in the States, I think overall, the art worlds tend to overlap to a very significant degree just across the global north. And if we were to be speaking about other regions where I work, then you see kind of larger differences, both in terms of the philanthropic economies, but also networks in terms of trying to grow and nurture artists. But I think one of the biggest difference in the U.S. is probably a larger reliance on private support, but we are moving more in that direction here as well.